Hey, Trika. Hi. Hey, can you stop the recording? I can't hear. You're muted.
Sorry, can you make me host? I can't do anything.
Oh, okay. Oh, claim host. Oh.
See,
Yeah, we're gonna have to troubleshoot this here. Yeah, just give me some time because I didn't set this up. We'll figure it out, but you're just gonna have to be patient with me here.
Okay. That's where I was when you logged on. I was going to log in and claim host, but I don't have the host key. Anna does.
We'll figure this out. Oh. Yeah.
And nobody can share a screen except for the host too, so.
Yeah.
Hi, Suzy and Paul. Ben, let's see, you're muted, you two. Ben is currently tracking down the host key so that I can be made host. And the reason for that is that Anna originally set up the Zoom meeting, so that automatically makes her host. So we're tracking it down. And Suzy, you all have your PowerPoint up and ready to go?
Yeah. We do.
Awesome.
Oh, Keek's there. Oh, hi, Keek.
Kiki, you're there. You made it. We're all just gonna wait here a little bit until Ben's tracking down the host key so that I can be made host and also enable the share screen with Paul and Suzy.
What is it?
Correct.
Yeah, but what are they? Oh, people, I guess. Or
They're earrings. They're hard to see. Are they fish?
maybe. Yeah.
You're so close to the screen, it's hard to see. Oh no, they're.
That's devil's claw.
Ah.
Oh.
Turn on your mic, Kiki. That way that you'll be the big screen. You'll be the speaker. We can see you big. All I see is a little square.
Right. Oh, there we go.
There you go. Hang them up. Show them up. Shit, let's see them again.
Okay. So yeah, they're yuccapods.
Oh, they're yucca.
Okay.
Great.
But so Robert, I do devil claws also.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very
very cool.
And look at you wearing that cable knit sweater.
Only good Irish wool works in Newfoundland.
Oh,
Wait, are you there?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, Canada, you want me to sing? No, you don't want me to sing. Hi, you too. Yay, yay.
Oh, Anna's on. Thank you, Anna. Can you make me the host? And then we also need to enable screen sharing. Happy birthday, Anna.
Yay.
She probably hates that. She probably.
No.
Oh,
We'll have
and
to
it's
do a
down.
big round.
You can unmute as needed. If you go to the bottom of your screen and you click on the little icon that says participants, a box will open. You'll see your name, and you can unclick there, or you can also unclick your little mute icon at the bottom of that screen as well. So welcome everybody. It's great to see all your faces and names, however you choose to log in. You're here. It's amazing to think that it's the middle and on the other side, the downhill side of May, and we're still doing this. So glad you could all be here, because where else would you be? But even if you had a choice, you'd be here, because tonight's going to be pretty fantastic with our presentation. But before Paul and Suzy Fish speak, Ben, our beloved director, is kind of going to bring us up to speed on the opening of Tumamoc and things that we can expect. And then after Ben, you can hand it back to me, and then we'll get started with Paul and Suzy. So Ben.
Wonderful, cool. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. So yes, I am here up at the hill as we're speaking. I've actually been spending most of my days up here during the workday, just to make sure that everything's okay. You know, there's really just myself and Clark Redden. I think some of you met our director of operations, and then Beto's been coming up and helping us with the greenhouse. But that's it. No one else has been up here, so we've been keeping an eye on the site, and happy to report that all in all things are doing pretty well. It's been important that we've been here, though. Things have definitely come up. So anyway, you all are, I'm sure, aware, and I imagine got my email as well, that we're going to be reopening on Memorial Day, the 25th. And so that is, at this point, I don't think I will go into too many details about because I'm sure you read the email and we're in touch. But so I want to just field any questions that you may have. You know, we're reopening in a way that we're trying to really navigate, right? This is all such a fine, tenuous line, and how can we do so to give people their the connection, the importance of this space and outdoor exercise, but in a way that we're trying to keep our community safe. So wearing a mask is going to be very important, and I think a lot of research has shown that as one of the most important ways, especially when you're physically exerting yourself, to not get things out there. So you're wearing your mask for other people. That's the primary thing. And we're really going to try to, I mean, let's be honest, wearing a mask when you exercise, unless you're one of those glutton for punishments and you wear those like crazy things, you sound like Darth Vader as you're hiking. Like other than that, like who does that voluntarily? Like it's not very fun. But it's really important, and it's going to be excuse the pun, but an uphill battle here for getting people to wear masks. So we're actually working, just got off a call, Robert and I just did with Cream Creative, a local printing shop here in Tucson. We're creating Tumamoc masks, special designs, and that's a really fun, creative, collaborative project. And you guys are going to be on the first ones to really know and hear about that. We'll make sure to get you some of those down the road. But just kind of the things we're thinking about how to address the current moment. But of course, the most thing pursuant to all you is that, as I shared, we cannot welcome you back to the Hill in your official capacity at this time. And I think that while that's not, we love your help and the role and everything we're building in these weeks, but at the same time, I think it's important. It's very cut and dry here. And the university has a strict work from home policy in place that does not allow designated campus colleagues of any sort, especially volunteers, to fulfill their official capacity with the university in any way during this period. And so that date currently is through June 30th. We're in communication as we reopen Tumamoc to the public. With one part of the conversation was you all and the role you serve for us, and so they're aware of the important role you serve for us. And so as the phased reopening continues to happen, we'll be in touch about when it's appropriate to bring the Stewards program back in to flow. Of course, any of you as individuals can come and walk the Hill once we reopen on the 25th as you like. But we ask that you not wear your vests or hats to be that in an official capacity. So anyway, all of that is pretty redundant of things I imagine you already know. Is there any questions or thoughts that anyone wanted to share before we kind of go further?
And
Question.
Lily's got a question there. Go ahead, Lily.
So is the Hill open 24/7, or will there be certain hours where people can walk?
Yeah, so we're gonna have our normal walking hours, so from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then one of the things that we're these new protocols, right? Like one of the things we're trying to get across to people is that it's not just gonna be like it was before. It's not just gonna be a resumption to normal, right? That there's a new normal that we're working really hard to set. And one of those has to do with the hours. So, and there's been a lot of confusion on this. So you all can be a lot of help in talking to your circle and networks, is that we're asking that between 6 and 8 a.m. that those hours be reserved for people that are especially vulnerable, increased risk to the virus. And so that can be broadly defined, of course, and it's not, this is by no means people over 65, right? There's people that have other vulnerabilities that make them. So it's very similar to the grocery store model, right? So just thinking that we're trying to carve out space and create that space and time for members of our community that are more vulnerable to this, so that they can get the exercise that we all need in that way. So it's not, none of this we're going to be enforcing. And so it's just, it's an important messaging thing to consider. And so if you are, I would say the best way to consider is that if you're able to walk at times other than 6 and 8, and you're not increased risk to this, then do that. And the dirty secret of this all is going to be that, we're reopening the Hill as it's like 105 out, right? So if you walk in the middle of the day, you're not going to have that many people probably to be walking with. So if you can handle the heat, the best thing to do is going to be to come out here at off hours. There's going to be, we're just trying to reduce that crunch of people early in the morning to just give that space to those at more risk. But the sunrise and sunset hours are likely going to be very busy.
There's also a question from Mary.
Mhm.
Lily and Mary, thanks for knowing how to raise your hand. Anybody else have a question? Either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and speak up. It would be better if you raise your hand, but that's fine. And then after you've asked your question, please lower your hand. So both Mary, you're next, and then Jeannie has a question.
So you probably already answered this, but I was wondering how you're planning on enforcing and monitoring the situation on the hill moving forward with the reopening, and enforcing the masks and the distance.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that it's an individual choice for anybody who sets foot on the hill to walk, right? It is a calculated risk that anyone who walks the hill is taking. And it's not safe, right? But going outside your front door is not safe. So I think that that's just an important context. And connected to that is we're not going to be enforcing. We're not going to be, UAPD is not going to be out here citing people for not wearing a mask, they're not going to cite people for a minimum of 6 feet distance, right? That's an impossible position to be in. And nor our staff, myself or Clark or Trika, none of us are going to be out there putting ourselves in harm's way to literally expose ourselves to tell people to start wearing masks. That is also an untenable position. We are going to be monitoring this through the daily walker count numbers that I've shared with you all before. And then we're also going to be putting some camera traps up in a couple locations that is just going to be managed. The images are just going to be managed by staff, not shared at all, but just as kind of an objective eye to just be tracking, just seeing, having kind of a sense, because normally I am the camera trap, meaning that I walk the hill and you all walk the hill and we talk and we interact, but I'm not going to be putting myself out there nearly as much in that position. And so we need some way of kind of a risk-free to get a sense. So that is one of the ways. I prefer that you all don't share that too widely because I think that information could get misconstrued, and it's not about spying on people at all. It's just a way of having an objective sense of how's this going. And so if we're just seeing, day after day after day of clusters of people, and it's just this complete disaster, then we need to have informed and adaptive management to make the decisions, and closing the hill is absolutely an option on the table at all times to keep our community safe.
So thank you, Mary. Jeannie has a question, and then I've got a question forwarded that I'll ask after Jeannie's.
Okay, I was just curious, are you going to be watering the plants this summer in the courtyard?
Yes, we are. So they're getting thirsty. So up to now, again, because we're on such limited staffing that Robert and I have been doing the watering and all trading off. We can't really, ask people to come in under their volunteer status. Again, it's the same protocols that hold. But if any of you isn't, well, anyway, I'll just keep it there. If you had extra special interest in trying to figure out some way to help us with the watering, you can email me separately and we can talk about that. But honestly, it's working pretty well between Robert and I doing that. But thank you for asking. But I mean, as this phased reopening, reentry happens with research across the university, I think there's going to be ways for us to have a central task to expand the labor force that's helping us with that.
I have one more. I think I know I asked you in an email, but I can't remember. Will the porta potties be open?
That's a great question. So the two pieces there's 3 pieces that we're still working through with leadership. 1, what is the status of the porta potties? 2, what's the status of the drinking fountain? And 3, what's the status of these marks? We've thrown out the idea to put every 10 feet arrows going up the hill, and then on the way down, arrows every 10 feet, just as benchmarks of social distancing check-ins, right? Just visual clues that and I don't know about you all, but like, I thought I knew what 6 feet distance was better than I do. And I can tell you my dad sure as hell doesn't know what 6 feet distance is. And so it's just like, it's helpful, I think, to have those visual clues. So anyway, we're looking about installing those marks on the hill. So all of those are still pending questions. We're looking for working those out, detailed with U of A leadership. A long-winded answer of saying that we still don't know. So the porta potties are a no-win situation. We need them because we've seen, even while we've been closed and have so few numbers, that sometimes people just don't realize that they should go to the bathroom before they come for a 45-minute walk. And so we're really seeing defecation and urination on site. And so with so many people, and especially kids, or I mean, you curate the whole scenario. But at the same time, there's a lot of concern about creating vector loads in the porta potties. So we've talked to everybody we can about working through this. And it seems that having consistent maintenance of the porta potties as usual, put some signage of like, you know, really now enter at your own risk. Like, it was already bad to enter a portable potty, but now it's like, really? And then to have hand sanitizer stations outside. It looks like, I think we're going to be able to have the drinking fountain operational again with a hand sanitizer station, and maybe just limit it to the refill, you know, so you're not putting your face there. And so that's where we're at. But sorry, again, a long-winded answer. All of this will be very clear by when we open on May 25th, and it's going to be in the protocols that we are communicating with them. I'll just also mention that in that protocols that we share when we do reopen is that we're working with one of our artists as part of the arts program, Barbara Turkanian, on creating a really nice visual diagram that shows all these protocols. Kind of like a little comic book, graphic novel approach to it. That's just trying to, again, communicate this new way to walk the hill. And one thing that I just think that is going to take from all of us that when we walk the hill is patience, right? Like, I know I just used to be like just zipping up there and passing people in and out, and like, not going to be like that anymore. I mean, you're going to have to be very conscious about how we are spatially with other people and when we do it. And I'll just mention that, you know, there's going to be times when, if you do come back to walk the hill, and it may feel really good, and people may be really conscientious. And then there could, undoubtedly, there's going to be other times when it's just like, that was terrifying. Like, I don't know if I can do that. And I think it's just going to be like this giant evolving experiment, honestly. I don't quote me on this. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. So anyway, Trika, you said you were going to forward a...
yeah, I'm going to ask a question. Thanks for that, Jeannie, and thanks for the answer there, Ben. But Maggie shares that she has recently got some UA forms again to be filled out, and many of you got those to begin with. Do these need to be filled out? What's going on? And is it happening all over again? So if you could bring everybody up to speed on that, what to expect, etc.
Yeah, don't over worry on this one at all. So essentially, there is as the lab has just been we're refining our position in RII, the Research Innovation, just administrative where we fit. As part of that, the RII, who approves all your volunteer DCC paperwork, was just doing some behind the, essentially just cleaning and organization. And when they did a search, they're doing this campus-wide, right, like across all their units. And they saw that many of the DCCs of Tumamoc did not have their file and paperwork fully completed. So there's a couple steps that I think need to be taken even after you've gotten your email and you're in the system. They're asking that everybody complete every little element in that checklist. And so just go back to that email and you can follow what the pending items are. If it's just too murky and you can't see what the problem is, feel free to email Trika and Anna, and then they'll be in direct connection with you. I know many of you have gotten that. I've talked to some of you who were able to work through it, but if it's, so it's, don't have to redo everything. It's just refining what was already done.
Yeah, I received it as well, just for the record. And if there was something that you actually hadn't finished in the previous permutation of our existence, you might have to go back and finish it. But just feel free to, like Ben said, reach out to Anna or myself. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. It's almost 6 o'clock and we've got some amazing presenters poised to share their work. Anything else? So
I just had an off the top thought on my head, was that while we can't have you all be doing your stewarding while you're here, and each, as we said earlier, each one of you are doing, it's an independent choice as if you want to walk the hill. And yeah, I think I just on the chat box, Rachel and Jeannie were sharing, yeah, like there's, it may not be comfortable for us. If you do walk the hill, feel free to just shoot us an email with and many of you were doing that already in terms of what you were seeing when you walked and just were sharing comments, you're not doing it just as a friend, just, say, hey, this is what I saw when I walked the hill, and just keep in mind that would be super helpful. So, but again, you're doing it just kind of as a passing just email to friends, not asking you anything more than that.
I think that's a great idea. And I agree with you, Rachel. I bike the loop regularly and I will not go out on Saturdays or Sunday mornings anymore. It's just wall-to-wall people and no mask. So you just got to pick your timing. Another thing I wanted to mention before introducing Paul and Suzy is that May was the month that we are going to have this graduation or commencement or ceremony recognizing everyone as official Tumamoc Hill Stewards. Clearly, that's not happening, but it's not off of our radar. And I just really want to recognize that you are here and present and learning constantly and contributing constantly. And we really appreciate that. And it's not going unrecognized. And when we're on some semblance of being able to be together again, we will recognize this and we'll start anew and afresh. And I just wanted to honor all of you again for being here. That said,
there was sorry, Triga, not to steal you down. Thank you for saying that about the recognition. It's so spot on. And then Lauren, you asked a question about the wildlife cams. So I think, formally in terms of the way we had envisioned bringing you all in and working those projects, we can't do that at this time the way that we were going to. So, but I would say, yeah, let us know if you already have a sense of where you kind of want, like Lauren, if you want to work with the wildlife cams, awesome. Like we'll put your name there, and right as soon as we kind of get up and rolling, we can start folding people into the fold. We'll jump on it. There's a lot of pictures to look through, so yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Thanks for noticing that, Ben. Others have asked about the phenology trail, and that it really saddens me that we're not continuing and we haven't monitored this beautiful spring bloom of saguaro and everything up there. So we will find that opportunity in the future. And so just stay tuned and definitely reach out to us in emails. Displaying your interests. So anything else before? So here's, thank you all for raising your hands when you had questions or speaking up or sending something in a chat. I spoke with Suzanne and Paul Fish, our presenters today, in advance. And the way that we'll run this is that they've got an amazing PowerPoint presentation to share with you. They'll be offering that, and it would actually be best if you could hold, so maybe write down questions on the side, hold your questions till the end. If you have a really important burning question, you can go ahead and maybe chat it, send it in a chat. After their presentation, we'll have a discussion question, so you can at that point raise your hands, and we'll run it like we did at this point. But that said, I did send you all Suzanne and Paul Fish's brief bios, one of many bios, and we're really fortunate to have them as partners up on the Hill. And almost, I mean, they've been there longer than either Ben or I have, and have been working up there. Yeah. And that'll really be evident in their presentation today. And we're gonna mute everyone at this point except for Paul and Suzy, and they are gonna share their screen. So go ahead and do that, Paul or Suzy, and you can get started. Or if you had something else to say at this point before you got started. There they are.
This may be exciting. I've never done this, and neither has Suzy before. Oops. And I already did it.
Well, they did do it yesterday, and
Yeah.
it worked fine.
I think it will let you, it's just gonna freeze you out while it finishes saving that file. Okay, now it will let
Now
you
you
go.
can start the slideshow.
Okay.
Not there. Go to go under slideshow.
I've got it.
There you go.
Okay.
It was just saving. Yay!
Well, as anyone can see, Tumamoc Hill is really an important place for people in Tucson today. But we would argue that it has been an important place for people in the past as well. Jim Ayers, for instance, a former state historic preservation officer, categorized pre-1900 newspaper articles in Tucson and found literally dozens of references to Tumamoc Hill, people's interests and concerns sometimes about preservation, something we are all concerned about. People prior to 1900 were concerned about Tumamoc Hill's preservation as well. But it's not just us Tucsonans that are concerned about Tumamoc Hill. It's an important place to the modern and past historic Native Americans, the Tohono O'odham. And it's a place where we have had continuing consultation with people of that tradition, and something that's increased dramatically with the coming of Ben and Anna to Tumamoc Hill. And I think we can expect it in the future. Tumamoc Hill, of course, refers to horned lizard in the O'odham language. According to their traditions, horned toads, or toads of any kind, have great powers similar to that of a shaman or a priest. And if we can use Hohokam iconography, the pre-Hispanic peoples of this region, as an indication, horned toads were pretty important to them as well. This is a picture of a stone bowl or censer, something that archaeologists believe incense might have been burned in, with 4 horned toads around it. Our friend and colleague, Bernard Siqueiros, argues that building with volcanic rocks, as on Tumamoc Hill, has always been an important part of the O'odham tradition, and building important places using volcanic rocks. And in fact, visits by the planning committee for the O'odham Cultural Center in Topawa were inspired to use Tumamoc Hill walls as a planning concept for their center. Unfortunately, they could only do it symbolically, as you can see in the wall in front of the building, because when the architects costed it out, they found that it would consume their entire budget to simply build the walls of volcanic stone. So they opted for Chinese slate instead. For archaeologists, Tumamoc Hill falls into the category of trincheras sites, something that has been of increasing interest in the past couple of decades. They're simply archaeological sites with dry-laid stone walls, terraces, and other built features on dark volcanic hills in the southern Southwest and Northwest Mexico. It's a really confusing term because in the archaeological literature, it's used for all kinds of different things. There's a trincheras culture in Northwest Sonora that dates to only part of the time span reflected by trincheras sites. In Chihuahua, in the Sierra Madre region in general, the term, although in Spanish it means revetment or fortification, they used it for agricultural terraces. And then Cerro de Trincheras, like Cerro de Trincheras, referred to simply late prehistoric terrace villages on hills. Our interest in hilltop sites has been intermittent but continuous through our career here at Arizona, and we've been involved with our students in the investigation of 4 different site localities. Los Morteros, which dates to AD 1200 in the northern part of the Susan Basin at Los Morteros Estates. Cerro Prieto, which is a wonderful site just to the west of Red Rock, with massive terrace walls, a lot like the ones that we saw, fewer of them, but still massive at Cerro de Trincheras, and Tumamoc Hill. We spent a wonderful spring, 3-month spring, with National School of Anthropology graduate students, Mexican students, and University of Arizona students when we joined forces with Landy McGuire and Elisa Villapando, and we took the task of attempting to put their excavations into a landscape context, and we surveyed 75 square kilometers around Cerro de Trincheras. What generally we've learned came out in a book, Trincheras Sites in Time, Space, and Society. In brief, many large trincheras sites are complete villages with everything you would expect: ritual locations, residential locations, dooryard gardens, everything you would expect to find in a village. Furthermore, they occur throughout most of the agricultural era, from 1600 BC right on up to probably contact times in the 1500s. And they cross-cut time and culture areas throughout the borderlands. Sometime during one time period, they may be present in Chihuahua, but not in Sonora. During another time period, they're present in Arizona, but not in Chihuahua, and so on. But they intermittently occur. Another thing that we found that's similar to Cerro de Trincheras is that they early trinchera sites, not late ones, have encircling walls around them. And these are stylistically diagnostic. They're built in particular ways and encircle large village areas. Cerro Huancaña is one of these early trincheras villages, and it predates pottery with an initial occupation at 1350 BC and another one about 300 BC that makes that part of it contemporary. The upper part of Cerro Huancaña is the early part, and that dates to the 1300 BC. Occupations occur again at the summit with a few of the terraces inhabited, but most terraces at the bottom of the hill date to that later time period that's equivalent to Tumamoc Hill. The archaeologists who excavated it believe that that each terrace, each of the 450 terraces, is a residential terrace, and houses were constructed on them. And by using depth of trash and use of matates, they argue that it was a full-time sedentary occupation. It was a real village, in other words, at this initial time period of agriculture in the Southwest, which has been a real shock to archaeologists. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, before the discovery of complex irrigation in the Tucson Basin and the excavations at Cerro Huancaña, most people believed that farming was not a committed activity. It was done along the way to seasonal hunting and gathering and highly mobile peoples. At the
Paul,
other
can I
end,
interrupt you real quick? I'm so sorry. On that last image, that line, that vertical line, is that a wall, and there's different grazing patterns on either side of that?
it's a fence line, yes, and there are different grazing patterns.
Okay, thank you.
At the other end of the time spectrum is Cerro de Trincheras, another large village, which is a typical kind of trinchera site at each of these time periods. And it's the largest and most complex, and it was a subject of our tour in March that was hosted by Elisa Villapando. On each of the terraces, houses were constructed. Some of them had stone foundations, but most were what we call ocotillo houses, a common form right into the historic period, into recent times in Sonora, in which ocotillo frames were constructed and they were plastered over and looked very much like adobe houses. And they're very difficult in excavation to find, but the investigators at the site were lucky enough to locate some that had burned. Our survey showed that a very specialized kind of trinchera site that probably is ritual in nature surrounded Cerro de Trincheras, and the main feature is a large circular structure they average about 20 meters in diameter, and they're called corrals in Sonora. And we believe that these contemporary sites were the scene of rituals that would take place more complexly and ultimately at Cerro de Trincheras itself. It's interesting, across the Southwest, Northwest, circular structures like these occur among the eastern pueblos. They're called sun temples, and they're retreats for priests to to take themselves away from the hustle and bustle of the larger pueblo. Some of the big questions that archaeologists are asking about Cerro de Trincheras concern their roles and how they are expressions of the importance of hills and mountains in ritual landscapes. We know from the ethnography of peoples here in the southern Southwest and on into the Northwest Mexico, how important hill summits are in rituals as pilgrimage destinations, as areas where rituals are carried out and so forth. Also, people are beginning to look more and more at them as unique centers in their regional settings. Here in the Tucson Basin, during Hohokam times, communities of dispersed farmers look on platform mounds as central places in their settlement systems. But interestingly, each platform mound settlement along the Santa Cruz has also a trinchera site, a large village associated with it that's located at the other end of the settlement distribution for that community. An enduring theme has been fortifications and refuges. One of Suzy's and my students has recently taken this and put it that maybe they're not really fortifications, but they're aggressive statements on the landscape in which people are claiming territories for their own. Probably, at least many people working in Mexico believe that they're an example of the kind of place crafting that you see in the Mesoamerican tradition of placing cities and ceremonial centers on hills. And in that sense, you might say Monte Alban's Trincheras site. Certainly there's a continuum of these kinds of sites deep into Mexico. Okay, and now Suzy will talk directly about Tumamoc.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you all for being stewards. Tumamoc really deserves you. And hopefully someday we can go up and see these things together. Anyway, Paul showed you these earlier kinds of trinchera sites with encircling continuous terracing around them in different places and different times that overlap with Tumamoc Hill. This one's in New Mexico. It's a little harder to see the terraces. But Tumamoc Hill falls into that category nicely. Okay, and I'm going to explain because you'll see these things in the maps as we go along. This is the road that comes up the hill, and these gray areas are the disturbed areas up on top. Okay, so Tumamoc's walls, we don't have as many as some of these other examples, but they fit into the time frame, both villages, with those kinds of walls. And here are Tumamoc's walls, and there are layers of them. This is the top up here, and we'll see this again and again. And then here are walls going down the side. They're not totally continuous, and some have some features in them. Okay. The summit where the villages were is 16 acres, a good size, and there were villages at 2 different times. And they're all within the top encircling walls here. And this is what they look like if you're standing up on the top. And they're villages at 2 different times. The first one, the earliest one, is about 300 BC, and it predates pottery. Keeps jumping. The second village is in the Tortolita phase, and by this time, that's about 800 years later than the first one, give or take, And by that time, people had begun to use pottery for the normal things we think of, serving and cooking and so forth. There's a little bit of pottery earlier, but this is sort of the time when you get all the shapes that people use for their domestic activities with cooking. Okay, and all of this work I'm going to talk about was done with University of Arizona field schools. So we brought students out during the day and then went back to the university. Okay, Tumamoc Hill has calibrated radiocarbon dates that work very well with the two different villages. So here's sort of the BC AD mark. The Cienega phase goes back this way. For our dates, about 300 years, and then the Tortolita phase would be in the vicinity of 500 AD. So BC and AD, pottery comes in between. In fact, between those two villages, there's a lot of important technological change in occupations around Tucson. Pottery comes in, and pottery that allows people to cook and store in a lot of new ways, very durable. Things like projectile points change in a great deal of ways. This would be a Cienega point from the Cienega phase, the earlier village. And these little tiny ones are Tortolita phase points. And many people, many archaeologists believe this miniaturization, so to speak, is because bows and arrows became much more common during these later times, and before there were other, spears and darts. Okay, another change is in the ground stone technology. These are monos that go with square metates, which come in later or become common later, and these would be more informal monos that go with other less formally shaped metates for the earlier village. So we have good markers of change that happens over that time. We call the Cienega phase occupation a village rather grandly, although we only have a record, an excavation record of 2 structures. But what makes us able to talk about a village at this time is the fact that some, if not all, of the huge walls at the top were constructed, which took a lot of people. And there's what we call a community room. So here's just a little pit house, and most of the pit houses were probably like this one. But this one dates the wall so that we can say it's from the Cienega phase. The pit house was built right up against the wall. This is a section of the wall around the top. And so because the wall had to be there to hold up the soil, the dirt fill in which to dig the pit house, we get a date on the wall itself from the pit house dug into the terrace behind it. So these big walls in many cases create terraces into which people dug pit houses. But this is the community room, and it was cut 70 centimeters down into massive caliche, which is at different depths under the surface at the top of Tumamoc. And you can see it here. They cut down through it without metal tools. And we had seen this in the roadway. We had seen these sort of odd circular shapes in the caliche, and dark soil in the middle, which was ashy. And so finally, Jim Watson, who's now a professor of anthropology and works also he's the associate director of the Arizona State Museum, had some students from a Midwest field school, and they had needed something to do, and so they excavated this community room, which is really interesting. The early one has this post hole pattern, which is appropriate for that time, and it has kind of a stone shaft coming up through the floor, which makes a pleasant sound when you whack it. So it's in a class of rocks of this type that are, you know, musical or tonal rocks. Okay, so these are our only two structures, the little round pit house and the community room in the center for the Cienega phase. All these others are from the later Tortolita village that you can see here. But we think that and the fact that people began building or finished all of the big walls at the top during this time, and the community room is good evidence that there was a true village up here. We simply did not have stone foundations at that time that we can find. So they're not, you can't map them from the surface as you can for the later village. Okay, these are the massive stone walls that we know, particularly in this stretch. The pit house up here, you can see the terrace surface up here, dated these walls. And this is set on the west side that are quite dramatic. It's the first communal architecture in probably the whole Southwest, if you want to call them architecture, because we don't, the only things that we can point to of this kind of communal labor scale before this were the canals in the Tucson area. And of course, they did take cooperative labor. So these are, you know, a real undertaking for people of the village. They're piled without mortar. We have 1.9 kilometers of them encircling Tumamoc. We have a pretty good volume, 3,200 cubic meters. We think it took about 1,000 person days, which isn't a huge amount for communal architecture, or not as much perhaps as a platform mound later, but they're no more than knee-high above the ground. So when we say walls, they're walls and terraces, but they're not something you could hide behind exactly. Okay, so then in the Tortolita village, we have all of these stone outlines, and this is a reconstruction of the houses they represent. They're kind of like little igloos in the sense that they have covered entryways, and these stone foundations were the bottoms of the structures, which had organic materials and then packed earth over the top. Some of the lower, of the other ones besides this shape were more rectangular and larger, and you can see there are 3 students sitting on it, on the walls, recording it. And it's quite reminiscent of Tono Atom houses before 1900, which also had these stone foundations. So very comparable and probably a little different in this period, of course, but again, small structures. Okay, it's very interesting. The Tortolita village houses, which we're seeing the foundations, share walls. So they share up 10 structures sharing walls, which probably means that these people are related, an extended family group of some sort. And we digitized the rocks and photographs, and it was interesting that we have these aerial photographs that we put together in mosaics of, for instance, this cluster, but the digitized image was easier to, made it easier to see. It's a very sensitive mouse. Wait a minute, let's see, yeah. Okay, made it easy to see the entrances. And even though these people were related enough that they wanted to share walls of their structures, when they got up in the morning and looked out their doorways, they didn't see anyone else. They didn't look in anyone else's doorway. And so they're kind of engineered for privacy. On the other hand, if we look at later Ho'okam courtyard groups, these are the entrances to those houses. They enter onto a common shared courtyard in these courtyard groups. So kind of the social engineering had changed over time. Okay, so there's the community room. And we can ask, because it's a common question, oh my goodness, why would people walk all the way up to Tumamoc Hill to live in a village? And we'll talk about that later. But, you know, I think the walkers on Tumamoc Hill who are there in droves with children and older people and walking up the hill for recreation kind of make it clear that perhaps it's not such an incredible impediment to go up and down the hill, especially if you're in very good shape. So this is the Tortolita village, and you can see all these yellow structures around the houses. Those are walls that they built, sort of terrace kinds of walls, to make flatter surfaces outside their structures. So they had flat activity areas outside to deal with. And then this is where the contours really change. And so that kind of evens out houses. In fact, some of the houses attached to these walls in here. So these yellow walls took about a quarter of the effort of the big walls that go around the top of the hill. Okay. The people in the Tortolita village reused the footprint of the community room because they didn't want to dig it again, I'm sure. And they probably could see where it had been and probably knew historically. It was part of their history. So there's a different post hole pattern and a different higher floor. And this stone that sticks up from the floor is still there. And we know that the pottery that we find on Tumamoc Hill is very different from the sources at other villages at this time period, because it can be sourced to all parts of the Tucson Basin. So either the residents of Tumamoc Hill went out and traded and acquired that other pottery, or perhaps there were occasions, celebrations, when everyone came up to Tumamoc Hill, because it was the only site of its time on a hill, and so prominent in the Tucson Basin, and brought their food in for potlucks. So that would also get all this diverse pottery to the top of Tumamoc Hill. This is, again, all the houses and the big walls, but in this slide, we're showing where the cupules and mortars are. It's interesting, they undoubtedly had some utilitarian use. There are different ideas about that. Some say for sharpening the edges of manos, but they also intersect with rock art. Sometimes you have a conjunction of rock art and these small kinds of mortars which occur in sets. And you can see the mortars, which are the red dots, are mostly within the confines of the Tortolita village, or probably the earlier village as well. The rock art has a different distribution, and it's the green, and it's around the perimeter of the village and sort of out at the edges of the summit, some down here as well. So you can see a very different distribution. And this particular rock art is very interesting because it shows that people continued through time. This rock art would date centuries later than the other, much of the other rock art. And we know that because it's also a pottery design pattern of later times. And so people continued to come to the top of Tumamoc Hill after no one was living in the later village even, but it was an important historic place, and they continued to come up and create rock art, probably because of the importance of the location. So people from all times later, up until European contact, seem to have come to Tumamoc and left successive kinds of rock art, successive styles. There's also several solstice markers on Tumamoc Hill, and very early in the morning on June 21st, and Paul Maroka, I think, has taken people to see this. This arrow of light moves across the Solstice design, and this actually is repeated at other places in the Southwest and other Ho'okam sites. And it certainly suggests calendrics, because it's important in them to have the correct dates for their seasonal celebrations and ritual. And of course, a hill is a very appropriate place for that. Okay, so this is perhaps one of the most important aspects for people who lived on Tumamoc Hill. I'm pretty sure it's certainly important for us today as we climb it. It's the view shed. So in this view shed analysis, here is Tumamoc, and everything that's in white is visible from Tumamoc Hill. So here's the Cañada del Oro, Rayito Creek, Pantana Wash, the Avray Valley you can see into as well. And almost everything in the Tucson Basin is visible. It's quite remarkable. So if we look at other investigated Tortolita phase sites that are contemporary with the village, the later village on Tumamoc Hill, we can notice that all of them, see here's Tumamoc, all these others, and these are simply ones that have been investigated. Of course, there are others. All of these are in Tumamoc Hill's viewshed. That is, if you're on Tumamoc Hill, you can see all these other villages. But by the same token, there's intervisibility in that everybody in these villages should be able to see Tumamoc Hill. So again, I think that kind of attribute adds to the importance of Tumamoc Hill through time. Here's looking east to the mountains on the other side of the basin. And look at all these saguaros. I think that's quite significant in a choice for where people might live. And here's the unsurpassed visibility to the west. And over here are the Baba Kivris, where a major Tohono O'odham deity, I'itoi, lives. So many of the things that were, many of the places that were important in the ancestral O'odham world and the O'odham world are visible from Tumamoc Hill. Okay, so we're going to end with this list of questions, and I hope you take some time to look at that for a minute. Why live on Tumamoc Hill? The easy answer, and one that's often been given and may certainly be part of the reason for these villages, is that they're defensive. On the other hand, people who felt threatened down below could go up onto the hill and come back down when the threat was gone. They didn't have to make a permanent village at the top, although if the threat were ongoing, perhaps that would be convenient. But nevertheless, they went down probably daily because their major fields were on the floodplain below where they were irrigated. They had prime irrigated fields in the Tucson Basin. So, you know, we might think again of sort of a posture of defense and visible walls that would make people think twice. On the other hand, Tumamoc Hill is the only village on a hill during these early villages. So we could ask, why didn't people in all those other villages we saw along the river and along the Tucson mountains, why didn't they need to have a defensive hill as well? I mean, attacks go in both directions probably. In any case, these are interesting questions. We can't answer them all. We can't ask anyone what the answer is, except perhaps some descendants. But again, you know, knowing exactly what was going on so many years ago is difficult. Okay, but they are unique elevated village residents. It is at Tumamoc Hill. We can see the visibility, prime irrigated land, upland resources that are concentrated next to the river. And if you wanted to host ceremonies with saguaro wine, that would be very convenient. Natural observatory for astronomical and horizon marker calendrics. And we included the summer solstice marker, and there's more than one. It's centralized for major ceremonial gatherings or for any other kind of gathering you could think of. It's kind of central in the basin. It would allow signaling over long distances for various purposes, seeing enemies out there in the basin that would eventually get to Tumamoc Hill, but at the same time, announcing ceremonies with something like smoke. Continuing rock art messaging through time and after the villages were no longer occupied. It's an enduring landmark with cultural and historical connections that the pre-Hispanic peoples, of course, were very well aware of and cared about. And we care about these same kinds of traditions now with regard to Tumamoc. So I think now we'll open up the presentation, and we have some time left for questions. So Trika, are you going to?
Yeah, I just had to unmute myself there.
Okay.
Phenomenal. I learned so much. And we've got a question already. I'll just jump in order. I think Jeannie was the first one to have her hand up. If you want to unmute and speak your question, Jeannie.
So between the two different periods of the villages, did they kind of all go away and then come back, or how long was the?
They went away for there somewhere around. I mean, we can't be totally exact, but somewhere in the vicinity of 800 years went by between the occupation of the first village and the next village. And I think it was an important place, a landmark already, and people never forgot where it was. And then after that time, it became important for some reason to people to reoccupy the top. And we don't see any great replacements of population. I think the first village was ancestral to the people in the second village. And so they had a shared history through time, and ancestral to people who still live here today and who have a memory of these villages on hills and think of them as significant places in their cultural heritage.
It's interesting. I think that the community structure is a good indication that Tumamoc Hill wasn't forgotten. Certainly after 800 years, the community structure had filled with earth and was no longer maybe even visible on the surface. Yet they knew to go back there and resurrect the community structure. And for a short time they used it, and then they ritually closed it, probably at a time they constructed a plaza in the center of Tumamoc Hill, and that plaza became the important village gathering point.
But I suspect succeeding people knew whose families had perhaps lived at some time in the first village on Tumamoc Hill. They had stories about it and stories about who lived there, and they probably were totally aware that there was a community structure there. And of course, they kept coming up and adding to the rock art over time.
So our next question is from Mary. Mary, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I actually have a handful of questions. Thank you for your talk. It was really, really interesting. So do you have any idea of how long each community was there for? Like how many years?
Okay, I think we would suggest that these were not very, very long occupations. For some time, they were there, they built all of this and the walls, but we don't have a huge buildup in what we call trash mounds of debris from their occupations. Actually, the whole top used to be littered with pottery and things like projectile points. So, I mean, we're not talking about a year or two. We're talking about, I would guess,
Generation.
a generation or two. Yeah, in both cases.
Great. And then all the trincheras date back to the first village. Were there any trincheras that were built after?
You mean the big walls?
Yeah, the big walls.
We don't know.
Okay.
If we could do a lot of work, if we could take a backhoe up to the top of Tumamoc Hill, which we will never do, we might be able to answer some of those questions.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't directly date the rocks in the walls.
Okay.
So you have to get associated features that have organic material you can date, like that little pit house that was right up against the wall and dug into the terrace. So it has to be done indirectly, and what it would take would be locating those features that have the organic material that can be radiocarbon dated. We kind of think, if you look at all those other villages that were early with that same kind of surrounding wall pattern, they're kind of look like they're laid out from the beginning. Right. They don't look so accretionary necessarily. Or at least the idea of the planning of the village would have been there. So we would guess that they were built mostly in the Cienega phase, in the earlier one.
And at least the upper tier of walls looks integrated. That, as Suzy said, it was planned from the start.
And then I guess my final question is, how preserved do you think they are? Like you mentioned, they don't come above your knee. Like, do you think they could have been taller when they were originally built? Do you think that maybe it did connect and was a little bit more continuous?
I think not. And for this reason, that if those big boulders, I mean, some of them took several people or two people or maybe three to carry individually, I think we'd see a bunch of them going down the hill if they had just tumbled over, or if somebody had pushed them over, which would be a really big job. So I think there isn't, sort of a spread of tumped over rocks around them. They're pretty discreet, pretty intact. And I don't think they were ever any higher. I think they are, they're obviously creating terraces in many places for pit houses. And then, for people who are interested in defensive qualities, they have said that you could stand on the terraces and have a good vantage to throw rocks down on attackers. But, you could also do it without the walls. You could just be up there on the top of Tumamoc and heave some cobbles and boulders down. So there was an intention to make a permanent place at the very least. And they never did build walls that you could stand behind and be safe from arrows or something that were shot uphill. So that's kind of the, a point that will be argued by archaeologists one way and the other for years to come. That's sort of the fun of being an archaeologist, I think.
You'd expect some of the tumbling to come down on the uphill side as well, and that doesn't occur at all. And they seem to be intentionally filled behind the wall. When we trenched, we found no evidence for them, for them to be naturally filled. The earth behind them.
Thank you.
And the slopes behind the terraces are often cleared completely of the rock terrace. In fact, they almost always are.
And as we tried to show in the general description of trinchera sites, a trinchera site often includes terracing for residential purposes or other purposes as well. Even the one that's built as late as AD 1300 had lots of terraces. So it's a recurring idea, although these are in different states in the US, different states in northern Mexico. The people who built them were 1,000 or more years apart in many cases, and they're not of a single cultural tradition. I'm sure they didn't all speak the same languages, but it was a recurring idea, and people are communicating with one another. So, what is this deal about putting things on hills? That's one of the basic questions. Okay.
Great question, and thanks for that answer. Also, just wanted to say, Paul and Suzy, if you didn't think we still needed the Why Live on Tumamoc Hill screen, you could stop sharing and we could go back to the gallery view. It's your choice. But we've got another question. Next in line is Rachel.
Okay.
Rachel, you need to unmute yourself. There she goes.
Hi there. I did want to say I loved your presentation. I really enjoyed learning about the two different phases and the differences between the two. And actually, my question was the same one that Mary had, the first one about the trincheras, whether they were all completed in the first phase. So thank you so much for answering that question. And thanks again. It was a wonderful presentation.
Well, thank you. And thank all of you for, being so interested in Tumamoc Hill. I think that's kind of a natural connection once you've climbed it.
So Lily has a question next.
I actually have two questions. Thank you. It was a great presentation. Are the rock art visible to the general public from the main road?
Well, there's a fence and a gate at the top, and it's kind of a sad thing that we would have to ask the general public not to walk up there all the time. But these are fragile remains, and the fact is that artifacts on the surface get carried away, and there's always somebody who might deface rock art. And there's some examples of that, even historical examples from, the early 1900s. And so people put their initials on it and all. And the idea is to keep this intact, not to keep it away from people, but people viewing it does have to be very careful and thoughtful. And, if everyone who walked the hill was there at the top looking at the rock art and the village remains all the time, there would be some attrition. So that's kind of the reason for it. If you are on the road, like if you're on a tour up there, which does happen, you could see some of the rock art from the road. Some you couldn't. Some you'd have to, climb a little down from the surface of the hill or the summit of the hill, and it's all over the place, but mostly out at the edges. And some of it goes down the edges, and some of it was made out on rocks at the very edge that it's a little precarious to get over there and see it, but it's visible and it has been inventoried, but I at the moment, it takes, going on a tour to go and see it and have it pointed out.
There's none that's really easily accessed from the road or seen from the road itself, except on top of the hill.
Yeah. There are some trails down from the top that go all the way to the bottom, and there's rock art that's visible from those trails. But again, it's not where the majority of walkers go and would have it visible on an everyday basis.
I think there might be one sun circle on one of the last switchbacks close to the top, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
The ones we know about,
Road, actually.
they all from visible at the summit.
Yeah,
Different
I
parts of
don't.
the summit, yeah.
Not from the summit, but like when you're going up the road, on the east side of the road, there is a small sun circle on a rock.
Okay,
Okay.
well,
I'll show you sometime.
maybe don't point it out to everybody that's walking up and down.
Yeah, I was just going to say a quick note, and Lily, thanks for asking that question. So we're very careful with this information in terms of how we communicate it. For example, that those amazing maps of the top of the hill that Paul and Suzy shared with the real detailed locality information. We don't print those. We don't publish those. We only share them very focused and kind of just in a presentation format or verbally. So I think the best way to communicate this information is just generally, right? The kind of collective information of you know, there's a lot of rock art up here and the mortars and just speak about it in general terms, and just to impart the importance of the site to folks. And you know, you can talk in detail about what you know, but I think we really try to reduce the specific nature of what we share, because who doesn't want to see that, right? And it could really, it could go in a bad direction pretty fast. Yeah.
Just the intense traffic that the hill formerly saw at the summit caused damage, and the gate has been extremely important in limiting that access. People unintentionally just walking over some of these features can unintentionally damage them.
I would certainly say that most archaeologists firmly believe that all of these things are public resources. They don't belong to us. They don't belong, you know, to the bureaucracies that create rules about them. They are for the public, and they're part of everyone's heritage, but particularly, you know, the tribes that are still descendants here and have memories about them. But they are fragile, and if we want them to last, we have to be very careful about preserving them.
I think Lily had a second question there. Is that right, Lily?
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Oh.
Regarding the pottery, are you able to find remnants of what sustenance these early settlers had, other than from agave and saguaro wine?
Yeah, and I mean, what you would need those jars for instance, is bringing water up. It's probably like some of the historic pueblos where girls went down to the bottom, you know, teenagers, and probably did it together and had a good time, and got the water in the morning and brought it back. And there were maybe some small reservoirs as well up at the top, but not enough to, you know, sustain people. But, you know, it's a trek down there to the water, although canals came closer to the base of Tumamoc. So no one had to go probably to the river. They could just go down to the nearest canal and get some water. It is a trek. It's, you know, it's an effort that we certainly don't have to make, but people in the post-contact period, Native American peoples in the post-contact period did do it at, for instance, places like Acoma. You know, it was a part of everyday life. So, you know, no one who lived up there was unaware that that was going to be part of the arrangement. So.
Wonderful. Did you have another question, Lily?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Lauren?
Deborah's next in line with a question there.
In line.
And then Eileen, I see you there too. We'll get to you.
Deborah, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you say me. So my question, one of the many things I was fascinated about was the other villages, the context of Tumamoc, when you talked about the view shed and the location of all the other settlements, that was the later period, right?
Yes,
What was the
well,
context of the earlier, how many, were there also lots of villages viewable from Tumamoc in the early period, or was it much more isolated?
The same general pattern would occur earlier as well. The Tucson Basin, as early as 1500 BC, was fairly densely occupied in areas where farming could be done. Any place that you could do irrigation along the mountain fronts with the streams coming out, even the Tortolitas had sufficient watersheds to allow farming to take place on the Bajadas, the upper Bajadas, and along the river.
Yeah. We know so much about the floodplains because of funding for big projects. And so the realignments and the improvements of the freeway, for instance, fund a lot of that work. And the funding is not quite as available for other parts of the basin. And it's also an area where archaeologists have used backhoes a lot because there was going to be destruction of the area. And so deeply buried sites are better known there as well. There's a lot of alluviation along the river, so it's not all readily visible.
And all disciplines have sort of blinders on what they look for. In the Southwest, there's been a strong tradition of archaeologists. If it's not on the surface, it doesn't exist, or close to the surface. And we had just come back from Georgia, where everyone would test using backhoes or in floodplains, or dig really deep tests. And we said, well, why isn't anybody doing it here? 10 years later, everybody started doing it when they found all of these very deeply buried early agricultural remains in this earliest evidence. Actually, it's the earliest evidence of irrigation in the New World.
Well, and there's a record of corn, which of course was domesticated further south, not in the Southwest, and made its way up from Mexico as much as almost 5,000 years ago in the Tucson area. So part of it is the accident of discovery or the effort of discovery, but we keep finding earlier and earlier dates. There's a lot of archaeological work going on in this area.
Aline, you had the question. We'll give you the last question, and then I'm going to say a quick word before we sign off.
I was just wondering, you mentioned there are tours. Is that something that we could do as a group, or it just seems so interesting to actually see, and now that we have like the blueprint in the background.
I would say that we love to show people what's on Tumamoc Hill. We loved working there with the students. It's such a wonderful experience to go up there and, walk back several thousand years, but especially in view of the many, many walkers and everything else that's going on right now, I think the people to figure that out would be Trika and Ben, when and if that could happen. Yeah.
Ben, before you jump in right there, I just want to say, and maybe this is what you were going to say, I don't mean to steal it, but hopefully to all of you stewards, and thank you, Paul and Suzy, phenomenal work, and probably an amazing eye-opener to all of you stewards, and a reality check as to, wow, this is just one more reason why we are here. This is an amazing site with amazing resources, and not everybody knows about all of these various artifacts, etc. But you do now, and you see one more really important reason to be doing what you're doing as stewards for this amazing place. And that's really all I wanted to say. And yes, we do hope to, in the future, be able to do a site-on visit of some of these sites with Paul and Suzy as our hosts. So Ben, I'll hand it over to you.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the intention for this kind of communicate this information was to do, different groups and then breaking down into smaller groups and seeing some of the sites. So we'll get there. Paul and Suzy are just so amazingly generous with their time. And so we, with the last several years, have been with the Agave Heritage Festival, been giving tours of the agave garden. So anyway, we'll bring all that back into the fold at the appropriate times. And you guys are going to be, the first to hear about that and get that opportunity. So yeah. So Paul and Suzy, again, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for coming.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All a last little gift here is a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to put into the chat box. So I have a pair of canyon wrens have made a nest in my office here at the lab, and the chicks hatched yesterday, and I've got a little canyon wren cam, and so I just pasted a link there to Zoom, and if we're just seeing it, you can maybe log in and just get a little dose of beauty. Mom's not on the nest right now, but she's coming in and out. So I think I'm testing the technology, but we may be able to keep that up continuously for the next couple of days. So anyway, you can just bookmark that tab and then you may be able to go back to that on and off. Anyway, that was the last little parting gift though. Mom's just on the nest. All right. That's it for me. Thank you all so much. We look forward to being in touch. We're going to continue to keep you up to speed. You're the first people to get the information. And anyway, be safe. And so good to talk to you all tonight. Paul and Suzy, thank you again. That was just fantastic.
Love seeing you guys.
Bye.
Love you guys.
Good night.
Really exciting program. Thank you.